Hi, everyone. Welcome to another installment of our Female Founder series. Today, I'm really excited to be speaking with Leslie Appleton-Young, who is the Chief Economist and Senior Vice President at the California Association of Realtors, and is just a powerhouse in this industry and inspiration to me personally. So thank you for being here, Leslie.
Rachel, I'm honored to be here. Thank you for asking.
And I want to mention too, it's the middle of your conference right now. And so
We've
really
got a
appreciate
lot going on this week.
you've got a lot going on. That's kind of like the story of your life, right? So do you mind just kind of taking us back to the beginning and tell us how you got to where you are today?
Well, just to a few highlights. I grew up in Southern California. I went to college in the Bay Area, and then I went to graduate school in Philadelphia at Penn. And after being on the East Coast for 10 years, I worked for the Federal Reserve Bank in Philadelphia. When I was in graduate school, I worked for a consulting firm in Providence, Rhode Island, which was really interesting, and then ended back in California. And Southern California saw an ad in the paper for a research analyst and thought, I can do that, right? And was hired by CAR in February of 1984. So a long time ago, and it was a different world in so many ways. But I majored in economics in undergrad. I went to graduate school in economics. I got my master's degree, and I learned everything I know about real estate on the job working for CAR.
And so certainly, I mean, kind of coming up within the ranks, not really knowing, starting at that entry level position and really learning everything and achieving what you have is success in and of itself. I'm curious how now, looking back on your career, how you would view success and how that's changed for you, and then kind of looking ahead too, what's next for you.
Well, I think one of the things that it's hard to know how much of it is generational and how much of it is personal, individual. I don't think I ever was as intentional about my career as it may look from the outside looking in. I liked economics. I went to graduate school and was surprised to find it was leaning heavily towards really high level math, which wasn't anything I found exciting. And I didn't have goals like that. It just kind of evolved. And the really wonderful thing that happened to me in my life was meeting Joel Singer and being hired. I mean, he's been my boss this whole entire time, and kind of provided the mentorship that I didn't get earlier in my career. And not just the mentorship in terms of how do you do it, but how do you think, and how do you why you should question everything. Because I was brought up in the 50s and the 60s where at least my interpretation was, you do what you're told, you color within the lines, this is the way it is. And it wasn't so much my family was like that, but the world was like that for women. And once you get into a profession and into graduate school, it's all about expanding the horizons, which in order to do that, you really have to question the foundation of what you've been taught. And I didn't learn that until I really started working at CAR. And I think the world is different now. I think young women don't look at their careers as maybe and secondary as much as this is who I am and what I want to be and what I want to do. And it all worked out for me, but I always think, if I had been more intentional and had thought bigger, where could I have gone, And again, lucky for me, I ended up in a profession that has, not only was Joel an amazing mentor, but there are incredible women in this industry that are very successful. And you don't find that certainly in the economics profession, you don't find that. So it was very lucky for me. I count my lucky stars that happened.
Well, thank you for sharing that honestly too. I mean, I think that it absolutely looks intentional from the outside looking in. And so I think
Right.
for others, hearing this, maybe there's relief in there that it doesn't have to be this master plan that you have to have worked out. And because you mentioned mentorship, I'm curious, you've really taken on that role in the industry in a lot of ways, and you are a mentor to many. And can you talk about sort of how you are advising your network now and your mentees, and sort of what this year has what you've seen through the challenges that have come up?
I think that's really a great question, and I just want to say out up front, I don't have any formal mentor relationships. I don't have someone that knocked on my door and said, "Be my mentor." I don't think successful mentorship often works that way when it's kind of pigeonholed into a, please mentor me. It's really been kind of like how it worked for me with Joel. I watched him, I learned from him, I asked questions, I touched base, and I have, um, been open to that in my career. I guess what I want to say is you just need to show up. You need to show up for people. And when someone has an interest or asks me about a book or wants to talk, I mean, I try to be available as much as I possibly can to help because I'm thinking about when you're 20, even when you're 30, like not a lot of difficult stuff has happened to you yet. This is one of the brokers who I absolutely love. Vanessa Bergmark said this, what do I have in common with someone who's 25? They haven't been through it. And looking now back at my life, I've been through a lot and I have a foundation of wisdom and lessons that in many cases were really difficult to learn. And I've learned them. And so sometimes I even surprise myself at the stuff that comes out of my mouth, but it's there because you lived it. It's not like you need it on a note card or, I left it in a drawer somewhere. It's just part of who you are. And I think the most important thing for anyone in that position to impart and help is to realize that they're going to get back so much more. And I look at um, some of the people that I work with that are younger, and they're digital natives, and they've taught me so much about how to communicate with different tools and in different channels, and why speed is so important. And it's really a whole new world. So it opens up that for you. For you as well. So it's incredibly rewarding. And I think again that's one of the things that I have um, enjoyed and benefited from in my career at the California Association of Realtors is just how personal it is, and how close we are, and how many people that I work with I truly love, and I care about their families. And it's, I guess that's all I'll say. It's just very personal, and the whole world isn't like that, and everyone isn't comfortable with that. But perhaps the greatest thing that can happen to you in your career is to land in an environment that fits with what you're comfortable in.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, and that definitely resonates because hearing you speak actually at WomanUP, and your daughters introduced you,
Right.
and they told the story of going to work with you and just watching and absorbing by osmosis, but also thinking about the fact that they were already part of this industry, and you're speaking to this. Global audience that is part of your family as well as literally your family. And
Right,
so,
right.
I mean, how did that feel? Like, I was blown away, and I don't even have any connection to you, but how did that
A
feel?
couple things I will tell you. One of the best parts of that was getting an email from a broker afterwards saying, "I am riddled with guilt about not being a full-time mom and being able to show up for everything." And hearing your daughters talk about how inspired they were growing up by what you were doing was an incredible gift that they gave me. And that was just like, because we all mothers do, you want to show up and be there for them. And I look at my daughters and the apple does not fall that far from the tree. They're very hardworking and they're engaged and they're articulate and we're very, very, very close. And it just meant the world to me to have them there and hear what they had to say about their crazy mom. you know?
That's well, it's amazing, and that story about that email, I mean, this is another unintentional thing, right? To your point earlier, that maybe it wasn't intentional, and you and she led by example, and you empowered them to then pursue that. So I'm curious because thinking about, you are an economist. So thinking about data, you look at way more data than most brokers and agents, I'm sure, look at. And one of the stats that you mention a lot and have talked about and I've read, you've written about is that, 60% of the industry of agents are women, but only about a quarter, but I think it's now 32% are are broker owners and own their own companies. Why do you think that is?
You know, there's why this gap exists is in the real estate industry. I think it's just a hesitation to take that role and take that responsibility. And one of the things I wanted to mention, earlier when I was talking about my career in economics is I didn't see any women, female economists in my world. I didn't see anybody raising kids and also doing this professional economics thing. And that's why it's so important that women that are now doing that are visible and can serve as those kind of as a role model to really see the possibilities. So that makes just a huge difference in because there certainly aren't barriers. And 2 years ago or last year when I spoke at Women Up, I talked about trying to understand why I am so proud to call myself a feminist. And so many of my friends in the real estate industry, very successful women, do not. That is not a label that they're comfortable with. They don't like it. They don't understand it. And what I did in that talk is I looked at what was going on in the economics profession in terms of the rampant misogyny, and there was a doctoral student who looked at the message board where they evaluated the next crop of PhDs coming onto the job market. And I told the group, I said I was going to do a word cloud on the most frequent words used to describe the female candidates and the male candidates, but I can't do that because what they just said about the female candidates was just so horribly sexist and awful. And up until 2 or 3 years ago at the AEA convention where you get interviewed, women were you were interviewed in a hotel room on a bed, not, I mean, just no awareness. And then you look at the real estate industry and it's a very different. So I experienced that feeling of not belonging. The real estate business is dominated by female agents and a lot of successful, not, I mean, there's a gap, but a lot of very powerful, successful female brokers. So a lot of the people that I know in this industry are kind of like, hey, what's the problem? And I was able to understand that, as I looked at our survey research and the experience, in economics, it's a vast majority of the women have experienced harassment, and it's much lower in real estate. So it's kind of like where you stand depends on where you sit, right? And it just kind of helped me be at peace with the fact that there's a reason why my outlook is like that. And certainly, as I keep saying, how lucky was it that I ended up at CAR, where I have never felt that anyone looked at me and said, "Why does CAR have a female chief economist?" I have always felt incredibly embraced by our membership. So that's been a very positive thing. But all that being said, the response to Women Up was unbelievable. It was so much more successful than we thought it would be. We had this incredible agenda, invited women to speak who were incredibly knowledgeable and had never been asked to speak at a conference before, right? The Deborah Trapin, one of the favorite quotes was that I say these things. I said, I've been going to Man Up conferences my whole life, to go to a conference where it's female voices, and it's starting to change. Absolutely. Brad Inman has been incredibly supportive of this movement for years. Joel's VP team is over half female at this point. So it's progress is being made, and it's been very exciting to see the response, right? And to slowly start to see the needle change a little bit.
Mhm. Well, that's definitely comforting and also very good to hear about the two different perspectives
Right, right.
in terms of that. Yeah. Um, you've talked about Joel and his leadership, and CAR is an association, so you're working with, tons and tons of different companies. I'm curious, what else has struck you about some of the best leaders that you've known over the years, and sort of what qualities made them so successful?
Um, I think one is they need to have a tremendous amount of integrity, a moral compass that's obvious and um, doesn't change. It may evolve, but it doesn't change. Like, I don't think a leader cannot be respected, right? A leader, um, is someone that you turn to, you look up to, and you kind of evaluate the path that they're laying out. You're invited in to develop that path, right? You're appreciated for your contribution, and you're moving in the right direction. So a good leader has to have that strong moral core. They have to be an excellent over communicator. You can't communicate too much, and they have to be comfortable. And I think this is what differentiates kind of the C-suite from everyone else a little bit, is you got to be comfortable with people being upset with you, with people not getting what they want. And that really isn't talked about enough. This whole idea of, take time for yourself, extreme self-care, you know, grow your team, but get rid of the people that, all that. There's a price for that, right? There's a price, and certainly for someone like me, that's a high price. It's like I want everyone to be happy and part of the team, but you've got to be kind of at the next level where there are going to be people. Great quote. Sometimes it's easier to change people than it is to change people, right? And there's going to be people that aren't going to be able to be part of the next wave. And the sooner you recognize that and deal with it, the better everybody is, even them, right? Because it just isn't the environment for them. I think the other thing about a really good leader is realizing that they need different voices, right? That they don't need a choir saying you're brilliant, but they need people that will disagree with each other, and people that have the same kind of work ethic and standards that they do. So everybody's accountable for each other. You don't want to be left behind, right? So there's a certain amount of transparency, and it's one of the things I've noticed in the last 6 months that the entire organization has been remote, is we've over communicated. We probably have too many Zoom meetings, and yet I feel more accountable and I feel more aware of what all the other parts of the organization were doing than when we had our VP meetings every other week. For some reason, it's just very different, kind of when all the chips are on the table and you've, you're trying to help your members and everybody is coalesced around kind of a crisis. So a good leader will not waste a crisis, right? A good leader will will leverage the ability that people are showing themselves how quickly they can change and how new needs can be met with new tools, and you just want to leverage that going forward.
Yeah. Well, I love that. And those observations make me think, a good leader has conviction is kind of one of the things you're saying, especially when, they're going to upset others. And personally, I love looking at data to build confidence and to give me conviction. And I think, being an economist, I'm sure you also, data drives a lot of decisions and a lot of information you get. A lot of this industry is very intuitive, and there are a lot of broker owners who are very much, I go with my gut. And whether taking risks or whether dealing with their teams, don't really love looking at data. So what's your view on sort of the importance of data versus intuition, and whether you in your role have any goals to kind of get people to embrace it differently?
You know, I'm not uh, I'm not sure that the brokers are as far away as the data. Certainly, the brokers that are running big offices, right, and are part of national organizations. I mean, they're all about the metrics, right? They know what their numbers. They know what their numbers are. They know who their producers are. They know who isn't. I think when you get into the kind of the smaller mom and pop environment, you do hear the stories about, opening the desk drawer to seeing how much money they have, and things like that. But I do think that that is changing. I think it is much harder to be successful in this business without, um, you know, business tools. And if you don't have them, you have someone working for you that does have them. Because you couldn't make this point in a better way. Decisions need to be based upon data. They can't be based upon opinion, right? And it doesn't mean that experience doesn't count. It does, absolutely. I've got a ton of experience, but you need to look at the data first so you really understand what's really going on, right? What's the real story? You just don't know until you put all the pieces together. So in our part of CAR that deals with the market, we have just in the last few years, have just done an absolutely amazing transformation. My team, and I don't want to take any credit for it because I don't know how to code. I don't know how to create a Power BI dashboard, but they do. And we have, since the pandemic hit, been downloading the statewide MLS data. We have contracts, formal contracts with every MLS in the state. We've been downloading the data every night. We are calculating average daily closings and new listings and pendings, an average for the week. Because things are changing so quickly, we couldn't wait till our monthly data came in, right? We needed to see what was happening now, and have developed, and they're automatically updated, these an infographic for all of the major cities and all of the major counties in California. So agents can go and just pluck off an infographic for their farm and put it into their um, newsletter, and off they go. So we've really been um, on a tear, if you will, to take all that data and make it actionable, right? Make it valuable, make it fill the the purpose of making our members the experts, right? The local market experts. And for years we only had county data. Well, nobody cares about county data. They want to know what's happening in their zip code, or they want to know what's happening in the luxury end of the market. Well, now we can do that. We can slice and dice the data um, every which way, and it's really been incredible. It's just one of the things I'm really excited about as I kind of look at my retirement at the end of this year is just how far we've come in terms of generating market statistics.
And I'm sure they'll continue to be tremendously invaluable, especially as, we look towards possibly, longer period of still staying in this pattern, which, has changed business. So I'm curious what else, being part of the association, what else are you hearing from your members or sort of doing to help them through the pandemic, in addition to the nightly data and all the improvements you've made?
I mentioned earlier how important it was for leaders to over communicate.
Mm.
And I would say we are over communicating. We have done hundreds of webinars. We are doing, we used to meet with the largest brokers twice a year. And now we're meeting with them every Friday. And it's expanded. I think we've got, two or three people that log in at 11 o'clock every Friday. And we have an hour and a half meeting where there's a few updates and then boom, it's Q&A primarily with our legal team because the rules and the regs of, navigating the business under COVID are changing and, there's all kinds of issues. So not only has that provided kind of everyone's saying, we hear this all the time. This is the highlight of the week. I wouldn't want to miss this meeting. And all of the staff that get to be on it, we learn so much because this is what is happening in the market right now. Within about a week and a half, we had our COVID microsite on car.org. It is updated daily. We had, weekly updates on what's going on in the market. We started a couple of hotlines for COVID, for the PUA and all the different insurances that were available to help people apply and get help. So it was all hands on deck. I'm almost exhausted thinking about it, but it was just an incredible thing that we were able to do because we had the tools to do it, right? And this industry's had a lot of tech tools available to it for years, that there just hasn't been the motivation. And now, this was the motivation. So, when we look back on 2020, I think there will be silver linings, and certainly this is one of them, right? It's been the acceleration of the adoption of tech tools that make sense during a pandemic.
Mhm. Well, and I'm glad you mentioned that because you have, decades of experience. And so when you look back, the pandemic is not the first big challenge you've overcome, macroeconomic or even at a local level. And so what advice would you give to others? You're going to retire at the end of this year. Congratulations, you mentioned. And, what would you say for how they should innovate through adverse conditions? And, the next time something of this scale or even less so happens, how should they continue to view the need to do more, to innovate, to bring on those tech tools to grow?
A couple of things I would always keep in mind that this too shall pass, right? That we will evolve and grow from this. So this is not an excuse to just sit back and let's wait till things get back to normal, right? This is going to be um, a whole new world. I think staying close to the consumer perspective and to look at the profession as not a sales job, but an education and facilitation job. And when you reframe it that way, it's all about staying in touch with your sphere and providing them with the information that they need and keeping yourself top of mind in that process. And the agents that have been incredibly successful the last 4 or 5 months are the ones that really never stopped working and never stopped doing that, right? And one thing for sure is everyone's always fascinated by real estate. right? If they're homeowners, they're all in what's going on in prices, what are the other areas, where are people moving? If they're renting, it's like, what are the opportunities for me to own or invest? How did other people do this? The knowledge base is so deep, and it changes, but it doesn't. You know what I mean? It's land above all is the land, right? It's the leasehold, it's the transferring dirt, from one hand to another in medieval times. So I think just keeping that perspective, and you always keep working, right? Because there's always a need for the latest information on what's going on market conditions, on all of that. So it's this is a great thing about real estate, right? The sky's the limit. No one's telling you what your what your salary is, what your bonus is, and it's like, how much do you want to do, right? And how creative can you be? And I think the other thing I'll say that has always impressed me about this industry is there's room for everyone. There's no one way to do it. You've got to really figure out who you are as a person, what you're comfortable with. The best diet is the one that you stay on. The best exercise program is the one that you do. The best career is the one that doesn't feel like a job, because you're really tapping into all of the things that you enjoy doing, right? And I kind of said that in some remarks last week, with respect to how grateful I was for CAR, because I was able to create a really hybrid position that fit with what I got excited about, right? So I've been very involved for the last 30 years with strategic planning, right? And reading books, and thinking about the future, and consumer needs, and consumer satisfaction, and who's doing what. And it's really exciting, so I kind of said, I have a lot of friends that have retired or are retiring, and the impression I get is, this has been just such a burden, and now I don't have to do this anymore. And for many people that I know, not just myself at CAR, leaving is so hard, because it's personal and it's exciting. And I would say the other thing that is so core about, I think, having a successful career is really believing in what you're about, and I am not a salesperson. That's not the part that attracts me here. It's home ownership, it's financial stability, it's intergenerational wealth transfer, it's quality of life. I mean, it doesn't get any bigger or more important than those things. So to be involved in that has really been just such an honor, really.
There's so much there. I feel like we could keep talking for hours in many directions, and maybe a post retirement project will be writing a book with some of this Leslie wisdom, all these Leslieisms.
We shall see. Just need to
Uh,
get through the next couple of months, and then we'll see.
yeah, a lot can still change. So I'm curious, because you did mention the future and how fun it has been to keep learning and stay connected, and a lot of your job is, trying to help predict and point others to things they should be paying attention to. So, what do you credit your ability to stay agile and connected and kind of spot that next thing? Is it all data, or are there other pieces, and how can others sort of embrace that?
I would say the key is to be a reader, and if you're not a reader, be a listener.
Mhm.
And not that you don't need to curate what's coming into your brain, but you know, there are so many brilliant minds out there that are now accessible, through podcasts and through books. So I have found that absolutely, invaluable. And every morning it's the Wall Street Journal and the New York Times. I mean, that's like the beginning. And then to have been involved for 30 years in strategic planning, where we would all read the same book. And some years it was multiple books, because what we found is everybody came into the committee with an opinion on everything, And when you read a book that challenged you, that made you think, that maybe had nothing to do with real estate, but everything to do with the future, people, technology, all of a sudden you created this common core of understanding or a base for the discussion. So I would really attribute it to that and having a job where I'm actually paid to do that, right? Paid to bring in the the disruptors and let's which we have done from day one at CAR, right? Always bringing in the disruptors and kind of hearing. So, how are you seeing things? Like, how are you seeing things that? What are we missing? And it's I don't know. It's Rachel. At the end of the day, it's got to be fun. It's got to be challenging, and you have to feel like you're engaged in a higher purpose. I work in an industry where everyone wakes up every day unemployed. That is something I could never do. So I have a tremendous amount of respect for people that choose that as their profession, and it's pretty terrific.
Yes, I agree. I never really understood grit, I think, until I came into this industry. So,
Right, absolutely.
well, two more questions, Leslie, and then I'll let you get back to your conference and everything else going on in your life. If you could pick one thing that you think the real estate industry needs to focus on or needs most in the next couple of years, what would you say?
I That answer has not ever changed for me. It's the consumer. There
Mm,
just needs to be a continual laser focused on renters, buyers, Gen Z, and who's coming up behind them, how to meet the needs of consumers, how to provide value to consumers. I don't care what the technology state is at a particular time, it's all about that, right? It's all about the connection, the caring, the analysis of what's happening with our client base. I think that's absolutely number one, always.
mhm. Well, I love it. And not something that will ever change, just as it hasn't.
That's right. That's right. Consumer satisfaction is what we're looking at.
Mhm. Yeah. So looking back, at your career and your life, I'm curious, last but not least, what advice would you give to your younger self now? If you could benefit from time and experience.
I think I would be more of a goal setter. I kind of missed all that until much later in my life. And, you know, being in my 20s and being on the East Coast, which is very different than California, and just being kind of overwhelmed and out of place, I think I would have told myself, you've got the important stuff, and you're not missing it. It's all right there. Just trust, and maybe have just been a little bit more, intentional about what the possibilities were. And, as I connect and mentor, younger people today, that's really what I love doing is like blowing apart their expectations. And honestly, often their expectations are already way out there, and I'm happy to see it. I'm really happy to see it. I think go big or go home, think big, but I would have encouraged myself to be more confident and trusting in my abilities younger in my life. I think that would be the one thing I would have loved to change.
Well, wise words. Thank you so much, Leslie. For everyone who had just tuned in, we're speaking with the amazing Leslie Appleton-Young, who is going to be retiring from the California Association of Realtors at the end of this year. I'm Rachel Allard with Union Street Media. Thank you, Leslie.
Rachel, it's been delightful. Thanks for having me.